Does anyone realize? I mean, I know a lot of people know that Taulia Tagovailoa is a good QB, and that Dontay Demus and Rakim Jarrett are great, great wide receivers. I know people know that, but do they actually? Do they actually give Maryland's offense the respect that it deserves? And I admit that I didn't. About a month ago, in my first iteration of my Big Ten predictions, I thought that Maryland was probably going to be one of the worst, if not the worst teams in the Big Ten. And a lot of that was because, look, their defense stinks. They fired Brian Stewart, their old DC, brought in a new guy a few weeks ago. They had to change up a lot of stuff on defense, and it just doesn't look good. I don't anticipate it will get better with all the transfers going out, like Brandon Jennings and Terrence Lewis. Their linebacker room doesn't look to be very deep, which is not good at all. And I thought, hey, with a bad defense and a bad offensive line, I don't know how this team will survive with the tough schedule they have. And we'll get to that tough schedule in a few minutes. But it's interesting because I read some things, and the main thing that changed my mind is, returning all their offensive line. And their offensive line was bad, but when you return a whole unit of experience, and their offensive line was better than their defense. It wasn't the worst thing in college football. When you return a whole unit, there's normally a guarantee of some level of improvement. If not that, even better, there's a guarantee of a good level of improvement, or even beyond that, a total breakout year, where that part of the field goes ballistic and is one of the best in the country. Not saying that's going to happen. That was one. The other was, some incoming transfers. There were a lot of outgoing transfers, but Maryland has some incoming transfers. They have a 4-star one from Florida. I think they have a linebacker or two coming in from other parts as well. That'll help with some defensive depth. So the transfer issues that I thought were going on, I thought it was a disaster there. It's actually not as bad as I would think it is, I guess. And Dontay Demus also seems to be having a pretty good recovery from what I hear as well, though I am hearing very little. I just looked a few places and saw that it was going pretty well. So those are just some of the reasons, and I decided that, I talk about some of the bigger teams, I might as well talk about everyone. I just think it's fair to do so. I'm actually pretty interested in discussing Maryland football and these other small schools, because who knows? Maybe Maryland will overachieve. Maybe another smaller school will do really well and will pull a Michigan State and shock everyone. Because Michigan State was viewed as a small team heading into 2021, and they crushed it. Michigan, even, being a blue blood that they are, was viewed as a team that was going to be gutter trash by their own standards, and they just won the Big Ten and had their best season since 1997, arguably, with less talent than a lot of those teams in between them and the 97 team. That Michigan team, you had a lot of 3-stars and lower-level 4-stars, even some 2-stars that very much contributed to Michigan winning the Big Ten and beating Ohio State. Maryland is curious, and it sparks my interest because they're a small team, but they have been recruiting at a level that is much higher than their on-field play. Getting some 5-stars. I mean, they recruited Rakim Jarrett, who was a 5-star wide receiver. Terrence Lewis was a 5-star linebacker. They got recruiting classes with 2 5-stars in a row. This past season, they did not have a top 25 recruiting class for the first time in a while, but they had better results on the field, and that is a good thing. I mean, results are finally translating on the field for Maryland. They went 7-6, 3-6 in conference. At moments, they showed signs of life, competing with Ohio State, Michigan State, and Michigan for a few minutes. Yeah, they got blown out in those games at the end, but they were more competitive against those teams than they have historically been. We all knew it was going to take a long time and a lot of effort to rebuild Maryland. So I guess now, after that was kind of previewing my thoughts and walking through what 2021 was, I guess we should talk about their schedule now. Just wanted to preview a little bit for you guys. Maryland's 2022 schedule is challenging. It does start out with 3 non-conference opponents, but Maryland, they get crossover games with Purdue from the West, Northwestern, and Wisconsin. And they have to play at Wisconsin in that crossover game. That's really tough. Their schedule doesn't align with them well. It provides some possible early momentum as all their 3 non-conference foes are relatively easy teams: Buffalo, Charlotte, and SMU. And Buffalo and SMU are home games. Charlotte's an away game, but Charlotte is so inferior when it comes to talent and probably inferior even when it comes to all-around coaching, that should be a good victory. September 3rd is the opener. It's against Buffalo. That should be a win. At Charlotte, September 10th should be a win. Saturday, September 17th against SMU, which is a home game, should be a win. So I think Maryland should start out 3-0. At Michigan, September 24th, I don't see how that can be a win. A, it's away at the big house. B, Michigan's probably has better talent at every position besides wide receiver and quarterback, and even those two you can somewhat debate because of the amount of talent that Michigan just has returning in their superior offensive coaching staff. But that's not to say that Maryland can't make some noise. Again, nothing is ever guaranteed, and you saw how Michigan played against Rutgers last year, but I'd say that's a loss. October 1st gets interesting with Maryland because they host Michigan State, and Michigan State is a terrible secondary. Michigan State plays, their defense is the equivalent of a dead animal when they play teams with great wide receivers and great quarterbacks. It never works out well for them. Their offense has to carry, and they'll be without Walker. Their front seven should improve as they return a lot of production there and bring in some nice additions, but their secondary really doesn't have much additions to it. None of them, except for Xavier Henderson, were any good. So assuming that Michigan State's secondary is still a weakness, though it probably won't be as bad as their 2021 secondary, it's hard for a unit to remain that bad 2 years in a row. Assuming that's the case, Maryland will match up very well offense to defense with Michigan State. Michigan State's also an explosive offense, though. They have a good quarterback and good wide receivers, so this will probably be somewhat of a shootout. Maryland can win this, but for now, I would stay with the Spartans. But October 1st is a game where I think Maryland can make itself known. If it is a good team, they will make themselves known either on October 1st or October 8th against Purdue. Purdue loses a lot. They lose David Bell and Jackson Anthrop to the NFL, their 2 main wide receivers, and they also lose star defensive end George Karlaftis, who's also off to the NFL. Purdue returns quarterback Aiden O'Connell, though, and they always seem to develop good wide receivers. That could be another game that's a shootout. For now, I would have that game as another loss to Maryland at the current moment. The next game up on the schedule is October 15th at Indiana. Indiana, they lose some on defense. They actually lose a lot, specifically linebacker Micah McFadden. They do return some in their secondary. Overall, Indiana does not look to be good, despite their nice transfer portal additions. Indiana's a team that I'm unsure of at the moment. They could shock everyone and go bowling, or they could, go 2-10 again. I think they'll do better. They'll go 4-8, 5-7 range, but I think Maryland will eke this out as a win. Same with Northwestern on October 22nd. Northwestern is probably going to be the worst team, at best probably second or third worst in the Big Ten. It's at Maryland. This will be a win for the Terrapins, and Maryland will be 5-3 heading into their bye week October 29th, but this is where the schedule gets really tough. They play at Wisconsin November 5th. Wisconsin, I'm not going to give a team like Maryland really much of an opportunity to win at Wisconsin. Though Wisconsin loses a lot on their defense, and if Maryland's offensive line improves, maybe you'll get to see, oddly enough, someone burning Jim Leonard's defense. And that's totally possible with the wide receiver and QB talent here at Maryland if the offensive line, of course, improves. I'm going to have this as a loss, though. It's at Wisconsin. Wisconsin's always solid. At Penn State, November 12th. Don't even need to explain that. I think that should be a loss. Even more so than Wisconsin, as Penn State returns a decent amount on their defense, specifically P.J. Mustipher, and I think they return their starting linebackers as well. And I think a secondary player, cornerback Tariq Castro-Fields, I think he might, I don't know. They return some guys on the secondary. My apologies if I don't know, the thousands of names or hundreds of names on Big Ten rosters. Hosting Ohio State, this one doesn't actually need explanation. It's Ohio State against, to be honest, an inferior team. November 19th, that'll be a loss. November 26th against Rutgers, I think will be a win for the Maryland Terrapins. So once again, Maryland going 6-6 is what I have them as. They could go better. I could see another 2 wins, maybe an 8-4 season. I could totally see that. Can't really see 9-3 or anything above, and I can't see this team being worse than 3-9 or 4-8. So that's running through the schedule and, previewing the team and my thoughts on them. And now let's go into more detail. So talking about the depth chart and some more specifics. Maryland would break the mold if they did better than 6-6 with the schedule they have. It's being completely real. Look at their schedule. I have them going 6-6. If they go 7-5, they're either beating Purdue, MSU, Michigan, Wisconsin, Penn State, or Ohio State. Purdue and Michigan State would be the most likely. It's not to say they can't make some noise with Penn State, Wisconsin, Ohio State, or Michigan, even though those are much more unlikely than the previous 2 I mentioned. They'd have to beat a good opponent to go 7-5, and Maryland has not beaten a good opponent in a very long time in football. Just by going 7-5 with this schedule, I think would show massive progress for Mike Locksley and his staff and his entire team. The offensive line is the only piece missing on offense. Yes, Chigoziem Okonkwo leaves, so does Fleet Davis. The starting tight end is Okonkwo. Fleet Davis was their starting running back. Very good. Both of them were. They're off to the NFL, but the entire offensive line returns, and I'd say that's the piece missing because nothing has been proven from them yet. They were a bad unit. No, they weren't like 130th, 129, 128 in the nation. They were still pretty bad, and they have to improve if they want to beat a solid opponent or 2. But quarterback is good with Taulia. Wide receivers with Dontay Demus, the transfer from Florida whose name I forget, and Rakim Jarrett. That's good. I'm going to assume with how Okonkwo was developed and how Fleet Davis was developed that tight end and running back are at least decent as well. The offensive line is what has to show, and maybe Maryland can be somewhat of what Michigan State was last year, as long as at least Taulia or one of their wide receivers has a breakout year and still improves, which I think one of those will. But it hinges on the offensive line. I'd say the season hinges to a certain degree on the offensive line. If Maryland has the same offensive line they did last year, I can't see them beating a good team. Can't see it. Maryland returns several key offensive contributors. We've already kind of discussed this, but again, Dontay Demus, he led the Big Ten in receiving yards before going down with that awful injury against Iowa. And by the way, not a lot of people they don't really know this, but half of Taulia Tagovailoa's interceptions were against Iowa, who, has one of the best secondaries in the nation. A secondary that gets in your head mentally. They physically just beat. Iowa's defense, Phil Parker, is probably one of the best maybe with the talent he works with, maybe the best defensive mind in the nation. And that's who Taulia Tagovailoa threw half of his interceptions against. Yeah. Outside of that, he played pretty well in most other games with the offensive line he was given. Dontay Demus, before his injury, had 507 receiving yards on 28 receptions, 3 touchdowns. He had an average of 18.1 yards per reception. He's a crazy good wide receiver. Now, yes, he, has an injury. That's obvious. Don't know why it took me so long to say that. And it probably took me, in retrospect, so long to say it because it's grueling and there's uncertainty about it. You don't know if he's going to be the same player. Michael Penix is an example of this. Ronnie Bell might not be the same player as well, and I'm saying that because I'm a Michigan fan and he's injured. It's nice to have him as an addition for Michigan's locker room, but you don't know with that ACL injury if he's going to be the same wide receiver. It's the same with Dontay Demus, which is why that Maryland is, thankful that they have Rakim Jarrett, because Rakim Jarrett is a really good wide receiver. He had 829 receiving yards for 5 touchdowns on 62 receptions. Carlos Carrier is off to the transfer portal, but that's not nearly as big of a deal as if Demus decided to go to the NFL or if Jarrett decided to enter the portal or declare, which I don't even know if he's eligible to, but whatever. It's hard, managing everyone and knowing about all these different players and such. The defense loses a lot of starters, and the transfer portal doesn't even need to be explained if you're a Maryland fan or even a non-Maryland fan and know what I'm talking about. They lost arguably their highest talented out of high school linebackers to the portal, Terrence Lewis and Brandon Jennings. Cross and Mosley, who I think are both secondary players on the defense, yes, safeties, have also departed, along with Lautez Rogers and Sam Aquaninonu. Probably butchered that name, but whatever. A starting defensive end departed as well. So a lot of depth leaving, a good amount of starters leaving as well. The defense, it needs to improve, but I'd say the offensive line improving is more critical. You have everyone returning there. There's no excuse for the offensive line to not improve. The defense, there's more work that needs to be done. A new coordinator. There's more wiggle room there, obviously. And kind of a mute point already, but Taulia Tagovailoa with Jarrett and Demus could be lethal, and I say could because, once again, kind of hinges on the offensive line. It also hinges on how Demus recovers and hinges on Tagovailoa. No offense, but it is easy to get in his head. The Iowa game is a perfect example. He threw, 5? Let me check on the game log. I think he threw 4 or 5 interceptions against Iowa. Yeah, he threw 5 picks. 5 picks. And I watched that game, and at some point he was throwing them to Iowa defenders, probably out of frustration trying to force things. He lets other teams get in his head. He just does. He threw a pick against Michigan State. He threw a pick 6 against Michigan, and Michigan doesn't really force too many turnovers. They sack you, they stop you, but if Michigan forces a turnover from you that's not very complimentary of your offense, he threw a pick against Kent State. He threw 2 against OSU, and we know how OSU's defense was. So, it's being honest. He's a good QB, but he needs to get a little more mentally tougher, not as frustrated, improve in some other areas. He'll still be one of the Big Ten's better QBs. He might even, at the end of the year, he might even be 3rd team all Big Ten. He could totally reach that, could totally get on the awards list. He does have that talent, let's not be mistaken. Maryland has a tough yet momentum-building schedule. We already went over this. If they start out 3-0 in dominating fashion, and if they play a close game with Michigan or even win, they could be red hot heading into 2 home games against Michigan State and Purdue. Don't think they'll beat Michigan at all. I'd have that almost as an absolute loss, but it's college football. You never know. Michigan State and Purdue are possibly winnable games, though, and that would, with, I think, someone else, I already forget who it is, Northwestern and Indiana, that could put Maryland in theory at 7-1 entering the bye week, or 6-2, I think would be their ceiling entering the bye week. And in saying that, my final note is if the pieces align, this team could cause chaos. Will they contend for the Big Ten? No. And in a different video, I will kind of explain who my realistic Big Ten sleepers are. Maryland is not one of them. Maryland is definitely not one of them. They don't have enough talent all around, and they don't have enough depth all around, nor the coaching staff, nor the players outside of wide receiver and QB to compete for the Big Ten and be in the picture for Indy. They just don't. But they can cause chaos. They can beat a good team or two, maybe three, but I just hinge on one or two good teams, such as Michigan State, Purdue, Michigan, Wisconsin, Penn State, and Ohio State are the 6 good teams on their schedule. They could certainly cause chaos and break the mold and get some momentum heading into 2023. And in doing so, they could totally overachieve. And that's all I have to say for this video. If you like this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Especially hit the notification bell because I'm going to be making more videos on Big Ten content. That's mainly what I do. Specifically, some of the smaller teams, talking about sleeper teams for the Big Ten, talking about teams across the whole landscape of college football who I think can win 10 games or more, and mostly by that contend for New Year's Six Bowls or the playoff. So hit the notification bell, subscribe, like this video, and comment your thoughts down below. Do you think Maryland can overachieve, go bowling, beat a good team or two? Or do you think that last year was kind of a mirage? The bad defense and the bad O-line performance will come back to bite them this year. Tell me down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.